So how do we make a chord progression go from sounding like this to sounding a little more like this? How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to look at how to take a chord progression and instantly make it more exciting. We're going to take a look at 5 different concepts that you can apply to take your musical project to the next level. So for starters, we're going to take one of the most basic, stock, commonly used chord progressions, the 1-5-6-4. It's also referred to as the 4 chords of rock, 4 chords of pop, and it sounds like what we just heard at the beginning of this video. So we're going to be in the key of G major, and so what that means is that our 1 chord is going to be G major, our 5 chord is going to be D major, our 6 chord is going to be E minor, and finally our 4 chord is going to be C major. So the first thing we can do to improve this progression is just add a little bit of movement to it. I think one of the easiest ways to do this is just to focus on arpeggiating each chord. So that already sounds better, but this is also not something that is just restricted to our right hand. We can do this in the left hand as well. One of the most frequently used shapes to do this is taking the root, the 5th, and the root again on top, and you can even grab the 10th if you can reach that far. All we're trying to do with this first step is really just get comfortable with a little bit more of a rhythmic style of playing. Moving on to our second concept, what we can do now is we can start to introduce inversions. Now, if you're not familiar, don't worry. An inversion is actually a pretty simple concept. It just means that we're going to take whatever chord that we're on. What we're going to do to invert this chord is we're going to take the bottom note, which is G, and just move it an octave up. And so now we have this, which is known as G major first inversion. If we do that again, we can take this B on the bottom, move it to the top. Now we have G major second inversion. And if we do that once again, we can take this D, move it to the top, and we're back around to G major root position an octave higher from where we were before. So now we're just going to take that and apply it to all the other chords in the sequence. So for this D major, we're going to have D major root position, first inversion, second inversion, E minor, root position, first inversion, second inversion. C major, root position, first inversion, second inversion. And just like when we were adding movement, this is not something that's just restricted to the right hand, because the principle behind whether or not a chord is inverted is really just dependent on what the bottom note of the chord is. So for instance, we can take a G major second inversion, but if we're playing a B in the bass, that chord is automatically G major first inversion, because it really just depends on what the bottom note is. If we have a D major root position and we play an A in the bass, it's now D major second inversion. The other reason that we use inversions is just because it limits the amount of movement that we have to do. So for instance, we could start off by playing this G major, and now to get to D major, all we have to do is move this B down to an A and this G down to an F sharp. And the movement that's required to get to this second chord is very limited. So now moving on to our third concept, which is going to be inserting passing chords into our progression. Now the definition that Wikipedia supplies for a passing chord is a chord that connects or passes between the notes of 2 diatonic chords. Which, I don't know, I don't think is really the best definition, because I think that it somewhat implies that a passing chord is non-diatonic. But I actually think this misses out on the broader idea of what a passing chord is, which is really an addition. It's like a bridge that connects from one chord to the next, but is also something that's not a fundamental component of the already established progression. I think one of the easiest and most commonly used passing chords is just taking the 5 chord of whatever chord we're going to. So for instance, we have our G to our D, and right here I think would be a good spot to insert a passing chord. So what do we do? Well, what we said just a second ago is we can take the 5 chord of whatever chord we're going to. We know we're going to E minor, so what's the 5 of that? Well, it's B major. And the other thing about passing chords is that they're usually very brief, so we're probably only going to land on this chord for a beat or 2. That sounds pretty nice. So how about we do the same thing before going to our C chord? We'll take the 5 of C, which is going to be G. So let's see how it sounds now. Sounds great, but if we want to go one step further, we can actually take what we already learned about inversions and now apply that to our passing chords. So maybe if we're not totally in love with how this B passing chord sounds, let's try inverting this chord and turn it into a B in first inversion. And maybe we'll do the same thing for the G going to the C. We'll take this G and turn it into G major first inversion. Our progression is starting to sound a lot more full now, which takes us to our fourth concept, which is going to be adding upper extensions to the chords that we already have in our sequence. So upper extensions can really just be thought of as extra notes. The most common upper extensions that we're going to encounter are things like the major 7, the 9, the 11, although lots of times we sharp this 11th, that's for another video, and the 13th. But if all that sounds a little overwhelming, don't worry. We can keep it simple, and lots of times it's better to keep it simple. So how about for this first chord, instead of just G, let's see what happens if we add an upper extension to this chord, maybe the 9, which is going to be the note A. That's nice. It has a very warm sound to it. It kind of fills in the space a little bit. And I think that what we can do to simplify this actually and make that upper extension stand out a little bit more is we can remove this G since we're already playing it down here. That has a really nice sound to it. So let's try doing that for some of our other chords. How about this D? Instead of just a regular D triad, how about we add an upper extension and turn this into a D7 chord, which means that we're going to be adding a C natural. And maybe if we want to even spice this one up a little bit more, we could add one more upper extension to it. How about the 13? So the way that we're going to find the 13 upper extension is just break this down. So we've got our D triad, which is the root, the third, and the fifth. There's our 7th, which we just added a second ago. There's our 9, our 11, and our 13. So let's go back to this D7. And now, since we know that the 13 is a B natural, how about we substitute this A here on top for that B? I like that. And we can also add upper extensions to these passing chords. So maybe we'll do the same thing for this B first inversion. We'll add an upper extension and turn it into a B7. We can do it for the next passing chord that we have. We'll have this G, and we can turn it into either a dominant 7, or I think actually what might sound kind of nice is this major 7. And this is something that you can play around with a lot until you find something that you like. So at this point, our chord progression sounds miles ahead of where it was at the beginning of this video, which brings us to our fifth and final concept, which is going to be listening for and incorporating melodic phrases. This is really what's going to bring everything together and solidify our chord progression. And the reason why I saved this one for last is because we're likely already hearing some of these melodic phrases emerge as a result of the last 4 concepts that we looked at. So for instance, on this first chord, I really like the sound of this upper extension that we added. And I think that I kind of hear it moving maybe up to this B and back down to our root. So like a again, that's something you can play around with. For our 5 chord, I think I do like holding on to that upper extension as a melody note, and maybe it resolves downward. And then for this E minor, maybe the same sort of thing, where we hold on to this A and resolve it downward. And for our final chord, maybe the same sort of thing. We take this upper extension that we added and resolve it down. And like I said, it's something that you can play around with until you find something that works. And if you can't apply all of these concepts right now, don't worry. Just go at your own pace for what suits your skill set and just play around with different ideas until you find something that works for you, because that's really what it's all about. So there you have it, guys. Those are the 5 different concepts that you can apply to hopefully improve your chord progression a little bit. I hope that you guys found this video helpful. If you did, do me a favor, please just give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment down below. I love reading comments, and let me know if you guys have any tips on how to improve a chord progression. Love to hear your thoughts. That's gonna do it for this one, guys. As always, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.